How to write a center story. First piece of advice I always give is start with the end. You want to start with the end because that way you always know where the story is going and you write backwards. And therefore you don't write yourself into a corner. Some people think that this means that your story is railroaded, but I think what is important to deviate from novelistic writing or grant writing or things like that is that you have to understand that this is not a normal writing in that regard, because the story you're telling is not indicative of you only. You have to construct a story that is both malleable and focused, because the different pieces, like the main piece of your story is your player characters, which in and of themselves are chaos. It is not railroading to know where you want the story to go, because without that guiding light, players will stagnate, and that's the worst thing that you possibly could have happened to them. You don't want them to stagnate out of the story. When you write, do not write in lines, write in circles. When you write in a circle, you're able to deviate off of the path, but then you end back up onto a point. So when you write, it should look like an hourglass. There are different points where this happens and then this happens. And then in the center, there are circles connecting it. In the hourglass part, you can have all these branching different paths, wherever they need to go. And the bigger you make the hourglass, the thick part of the hourglass, the more options that they have. And then if you make it correctly, the players won't feel like their story is railroaded. They won't feel like their story is linear. They won't feel like it has a rigid progression, because they'll have all these options to interact with it. But remember, this is a part of a benign deception that you have to really give to them, because of course the story has a linear progression, because it is impossible to write a truly sandbox open world. Like you just can't do it. You'll run out of creative energy. You'll run out of resources eventually. And then after all, remember, there's a reason that the party is there, and your center story has to have purpose. Every story has a purpose. So the biggest thing that you have to do is you have to get them to that point. You have to get them interested in the story and make them want to handle it. So you should always try to write 4 different paths. Why? Why 4? Well, that deals with the different alignments. Because even if your players don't in and of themselves respect the alignment system or believe in it or blah blah whatever, that doesn't matter. The point is that law, chaos, good, and evil are separated into those different places, and you need to build stories around those different options. The reason why it doesn't work in video games that much is because video games don't have the freedom of D&D. They don't have the ability to improv and to adapt on the fly. They have to say, pick one of those dialogue options and this pre-recorded response, and then you go down that route. Let me use Pride of the Nightwolf as an example. To get to the current point that they are at, where they have saved the Nightwolf and they are planning to help the town, there's many different ways that could have gone about that. The lawful side would have been to arrest the Nightwolf because he was believed to be a deserter and he was believed to have done all these things, and simply listening to what he says is not good enough. The good side, the one that what they went, is that they realized that the Nightwolf was trying to help these people, and they freed him when they realized he was a prisoner, and that's the path that they chose. The chaotic one would have been to demand that the Nightwolf provide some proof before they released them. And the evil side would have been to obviously join with the bandits. Which side that the players choose to deviate onto is dependent upon what alignment the party leans towards. And that can change based off circumstances, urgency, and of course panic. And then from those alignment paths, you can have additional branches based on things like religion, culture, and party dynamics. Now that you've got those 4 different connectors in, now you need to determine a 5th path, a player-generated path. Now this is where things get a little bit more difficult, and this is where D&D really shines. What if your players decide a completely different way to deal with it? And now we're going to deal with player intuition. First of all, a player is a meta concept, not the character. We're talking about players right now. So take characters from your mind, put it over here for right now. The player knows that they're playing in a story, right? So what they're going to try and do is they're going to try and manipulate the story to the best of their ability that works within the paradigm of their role-playing, connection to their character. So here's what you do. You want to build characters that are not fully fleshed out. They are concepts. You want to build story pieces that are not fully fleshed out. They are conceptual pieces. that you can take out and put back in as needed. I'll give you an example. Let's say the players decide in Pride of the Nightwolf that instead of defending the town, they want to attack the encampment, and they convince the town to do that, right? So they want to travel to another city, right? And they want to gather those troops, and they want to gather the money from the town in order to hire more people to go and attack the encampment, right? So let's say they want to attack first. What I do is I break every character down into its basic parts. So you have its race, you have its class, you have its background, and you have its personality. You have the 4 basic pieces. So what you do is you build a ton of options for those 4 basic pieces, and then you slap them together based off of what would be needed in this area. So if they're going to an area that you haven't prepared for, they're going to probably want to talk to a military leader. Well, you take the military class, boom. You take a leader type personality, boom. You take a race common to the area, let's say human, boom, got that. Then you have a background. Let's say he grew up as a peasant, boom. Now he's relatable and he understands where the villagers of Okogi are coming from. They walk up, they start talking to this character, you've got him ready already, even though you didn't write him yet. The more work you do ahead of time, the easier it'll be for you to improv. There's going to be a lot of writing that you may not use. So another thing I suggest is that when you're writing a center story, you don't get rid of them, you keep them. And you carry them over to next projects that you're doing. That way you build up a repository that you can keep using. That's what you got to do. Now you have to try and figure out, all right, how do I want to incorporate NPCs? Well, NPCs have 3 reasons to exist. To challenge the players, to direct the players, and to ground the players. Challenge means that they are enemies, or they are antagonistic forces, or skeptics, or whatever you want to call them, that are meant to be an obstacle for the players to overcome. Direct the players means that they are a guiding force. They provide supplies, they provide comedic relief, they direct the players where the plot is going. And then you have grounding NPCs. Now, many DMs ignore grounding NPCs. What I mean by grounding is it keeps the players immersed, because not every character there exists for their story. They exist because they are there. Grounding characters are very important, and even though they can be time wasters, putting them in the story for interaction purposes means that the players can interact with them, learn about them, learn maybe some lore or something. There's different expositions that you can do through them, but the point is that NPC is literally there to let the players know that they're in a world that exists regardless of them. But the biggest thing, every NPC serves a purpose to play. Even if they're there and they're just kind of standing around, they have one of those 3 jobs. What you don't want is a NPC that slows progression pointlessly. If you have an NPC that, I want to be clear, this is where we kind of enter my bias, but an NPC that you made as an anime insert, for example, like you put Naruto in your game, just so that you can like meme about ninjas. But their purpose is not there to teach the players about the world or ground them in the immersion or anything. They're there purely for a laugh. You can have comedic characters that mean something. A good example, Svelte can show you things like, he's funny and weird, but he shows you how dimensional magic works. He explains some of the rules of magic in a comedic way. And more importantly, he shows that the presence of other forces exist within the world. Or better yet, I'll use Wallace as another example. Wallace was an otaku fat guy, but he actually taught the players about different Akuma and was actually a reasonably useful source of information. Like, he was a direction NPC. He directed them where to go, and he did it through memeing. Basically, my big point here is humor is not an excuse to half-ass it. It serves a purpose. Alright, and then now that you've got those characters made, you've got your NPCs in their categories, you've got the direction your story is going, now you need to add player triggers. This is something that I do to really make people into the story. I have specific triggers that can only happen if players activate them. So if you think back to those big, thick hourglass pieces, right, of all the different routes you can go, you add triggers to all those different areas that you can go. You teach them early that, oh, if I do this, this triggers something. it rewards exploration, which is the most ignored aspect of D&D. I think that adding more of those player triggers will really get the players thinking, and then therefore the characters acting as if there are things to find. And if they act as if they are things to find, they become more interested in what they're doing. That's the secret of it. If it promises loot, power-ups, or just lore drops, people will try to find that stuff. But you have to demonstrate that there is something to find. And then once you establish that relationship with the players, and you should try to establish it early, even if you have to straight up tell them, then they'll start looking for it. Then they'll care about what's happening. Even if it's not the story they care about, it's the fact that they're trying to find these triggers. It becomes a secondary game to them. And that's okay, because here's the trick. If they play that mini game, they become invested. And then it raises your rate of player attention capturing to the story to a far greater degree, because you've tricked them into doing it, essentially. And I have a perfect example of how that can work in video games. Think of Dark Souls lore. How much of Dark Souls lore is explained to you straight up? Very little. Very little. You find the lore and the items and the secret places that you go and the secret things that you find. Like the Goker discovering the trigger for the main campaign. Absolutely. But why did he step into the circle? Because I had bait there. That was pure player bait, guys. The cultists are focusing on the center of the circle, so the natural inclination is, oh, I want to go into the middle of that circle. Something will happen if I go there. Something did happen. He went there, and then boom, he gets a huge, campaign drop, and he gets the main campaign info dropped on him. If the weird statues weren't there, and it was just the circle, and I made it something else, they may never have interacted with it. Alright, and then now that you've done all your player triggers, you've got your NPCs and their direction, you've got the story and its direction, you've got everything else set up, then you work on pacing and cadence. Now, this is going to be kind of more advanced stuff. How you pace the story is indicative of how many times you've seen change, like how much you let the players linger. If you let them, players can take 45 minutes to walk down a staircase and cross an inn at like a tavern floor, right? From all the interactions and inter-party role-playing and all that kind of stuff. And remember, you only have 2.5 to 3 hours to finish what you need to finish in the session. So, you have to make sure that you have all those different pieces allotted for it. You have to allot for inter-party roleplay. You have to allot time for shenanigans. You have to allot time for above-board discussion between the players. Like, you have to calculate all that stuff. And when you're writing a story, like, you have to make sure that the pacing doesn't mean that they spend too much time not doing the plot, because if they do that, they'll forget about it. And even if they take good notes, they'll forget about it. So what you do is you try to make sure that there are plenty of triggers and entice them that way. Or you can, with a soft hand, say, is there anything else you guys want to do before the morning comes? If they're resting or whatever. There are little things you can do as a DM that can push them into the next phase of the story. And it's important that you allot time for that when you make your story. Like, when you write it up in each of its different sections for each session, for each point that you want them to reach, you should allot some time in it to say, 30 minutes of them fucking around. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff like that. There's going to be a lot of extra stuff that you can find on how to write like a gardener or write like an architect. I do think those will help you, but remember that in D&D, writing out these different things has a very big difference in that the core center of your story is not in your control. So you're basically playing a reactive game. You're the carrot on the stick. You're trying to lead them. And you don't have absolute control, so you have to kind of play with that understanding. You're trying to entice the players into it. And writing out things focused on enticing players into it is going to be better time spent than trying to create an epic story, because remember, you creating an epic story is going to be more based on what the players are doing than what you wrote for anyway. How much should a campaign be supported by improv? 40%. You're probably going to do more than that, but you should allot for 40% improv. How do you explain better the writing backwards method, going back to the beginning, and any examples? You write your ending first, your ending scene, then you go backwards. You write, okay, they kill the Dark Lord in the tower, okay? They arrive at the tower. They travel towards the tower. They talk to the ancient wizard in the good tower, telling them where the bad tower is. They go to the town where they find out where the good wizard is. They go at the starting town where they see the remnants of the dark wizard. You see what I mean? Like, it's a step back, step back, step back. As a DM myself, sometimes it's hard for me to put the backstories of players into the story. You don't have to fully incorporate them. You can just have homages. Or, more importantly, like let's say the character went through a thing where all their family members died to a bandit raid. Maybe you put an orphan in the tavern that they can talk to who was orphaned by a bandit raid. You see? Now you've got that connection. Do you think every combat should be focused on furthering the plot, or random encounters still a good use of time? I think random encounters are oftentimes used if you're using an experience point system. I don't use an experience point system, I use a milestone. So every combat should either further the plot or ground the players. Or challenge them. Like, the idea here is that you should always do something. It should have meaning. There should never be a fight that is purely for experience points. That's something you want to avoid, in my opinion. How long do you think a DM should allow before putting in a gentle push towards resuming the plot? That's up to you, man. That's up to how much you've written. Could you give an example of role-playing around a player? Sure. So, let's say a player's sitting there and they say things like, my character walks up to the bartender and asks him where our contact is. Shut that shit down. Say something like, after they say that, say like, okay, but what do you say to him? Hey, I'm looking for a Dr. Narthan. And then he's like, Dr. Narthan, huh? Just between you and me, he's a little bit up at the head, but it's fine. You're probably there for a good reason. He's in the back, boyo. That's what I mean. You roleplay around them. You keep putting them in a situation where it is more valuable for them to roleplay than not to. Now, like I said, you won't catch everyone, but that's how you catch people. That's how you get them to do it. When writing backwards, do you ever take a forward perspective? Yeah, when I get to the beginning. So you start at the end, you get to the beginning, and then you move forward and you see if it makes sense. And then you adjust as needed. Like, my whole thing is start with the ending. That's just the start. That doesn't mean you don't ever go forward, but that's where you start. So that way you're focused and you know where the story's going. Basically, I'm trying to give you techniques to avoid writer's block. Why is it that PCs get more attached to Boblin, the Goblin NPC, instead of the one I made specifically for all the plot? Pretty simple, really. You're more comfortable playing Boblin because the casual approach that you have to playing him means that you're more open to wit, interpretation, and improv. Ironically, it's because you don't care about the character that you're able to make the character more cared for. I think that's pretty much it for how I write a story in D&D. How do you connect multiple campaigns when trying to create a living world? Very carefully.